right, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi here on this Wednesday as today's storm system winds down, and it was quite the mess of snow, sleet, and freezing rain, and even some thunderstorms that popped up on the radar this evening, which we're going to get to in just a moment. I'm just going to bring up the radar first off. And you can see the extent of the precip now is pretty much up in through New England, and you've got this arm of rain that goes down over Long Island and into New Jersey. There's actually some thunderstorms. We had some special marine warnings posted up for the New Jersey coast. The back edge of that precipitation is now moving across eastern New York, and there's a little clip of snow on the southwestern fringe of this that's coming into northwestern New Jersey at the moment. We're at 7:03 Eastern Time, in case you're watching. And by the way, I want to say a big welcome to those of you who are watching from my website. If you happen to be on my website, I'm able to live stream. This is live streaming at the same time, or at least that's what it's supposed to be doing in theory. Here's the close-up radar view of the Northeast, and if you look carefully, you see some of the yellows here on the radar, the heavier downpours that are over Long Island, but there might even be a developing thunderstorm in Long Island Sound. And as I said, just very briefly here, if you look real close on the beginning of the loop, a little blotch of yellows just kind of pop up and disappear off the New Jersey coast. So that was some thunderstorm activity there. We're still getting some freezing rain in parts of the Hudson Valley, and temperatures are beginning to fall now. We're actually up in the upper 40s to near 50 on Long Island as that warm air just shot up ahead of the cold front, and that created some rather interesting instability in the atmosphere to kick off some of that convection that we saw. Now, we also have what's left of the watches and warnings. We're going to take a look at those because we have a new slew of watches that are going up as well. So here we go. So here's the full U.S. view. And we've got winter storm warnings up still for much of the Northeast. The southern edge of this is going to be, they'll be coming down shortly. Winter weather advisories peppered over parts of southern New England. Then we have winter storm watches up now for southern Michigan, extreme northern Indiana, northern Illinois, with the next round of weather that's going to be coming through, and winter weather advisories in the purple that extend from southern Wisconsin across southernmost Minnesota, northern Iowa, northwest through South Dakota, and then we have winter storm warnings up for parts of Montana, extending southeast to northwest across the state, with still some winter storm watches on the southern flank. So this is kind of where these weather systems have been moving from the last few days. We've got the next one coming along, and they come into the east and they weaken. This one had a nice shot of Gulf moisture that got involved with low pressure that came out of the Tennessee Valley. This next one is going to be similar, except for the fact that there's not going to be the same amount of cold air in the east as there was this time around. So a pretty interesting pattern that we're in. Very active, very busy, just doesn't happen to be busy perhaps where you might be. I know some people are kind of upset, snow lovers. Can't be happy, can't make everybody happy all the time. It's a frustrating process, and I understand that, but this is the pattern we're in. With no block, these lows have just been able to fly up the coast without any kind of redevelopment, and there's no pinching of any cold air. But here's our surface for this evening on the GFS model, and then we're going to dry out. Probably going to have some serious black ice problems in some places around me late tonight and tomorrow morning, with temperatures going down in the teens and mid-20s. And then it looks dry for tomorrow. Now, here's that next system, and you can see the kind of a tongue of snow that in a narrow band that moves into Wisconsin, northern Illinois, northernmost Indiana, and southern Michigan. That system actually, as you see, it weakens. A little low sort of breaks off. The main energy drops down into New Mexico, so that area of snow winds up weakening. There'll probably be a band of 2 to 4, 3 to 6 inch snows from this when it moves through the Midwest and the plains and northern Rockies. And then that goes by. Now, we had a high with what just happened. Kind of the same thing happened yesterday. We got a little bit of snow shower activity and some little bubble high and colder air. But this time around, not so much of a bubble high here. So when that next round of moisture comes up from the Gulf states, it's going to be mostly rain and really confined to the coast. The system's not nearly as well defined here. Going through the weekend and into early next week. Little band of snow on the extreme northwestern side of this. And then another low comes out on Monday, if you believe the GFS, and that brings some snow into parts of western New York and northwestern Pennsylvania. No real cold air spreads into the east until we get to Tuesday and Wednesday, and that's really just marginal anyhow. We are going to continue to watch the pattern evolve next week, but there are signs out there in the long range that winter weather lovers and snow lovers should gain a little bit of encouragement with. The GFS, now again at this point we're coming up on day 9 and 10, and there is a frontal boundary that's being shown with some snow on the northern fringe. The European shows this also, so it's not like the GFS is standing alone. But I think we're starting to see the models at least grasp the idea of this big split in the vortex in the upper atmosphere that's going on, and what those implications of that split will be for the longer term. There's still the answer to that question is still a bit of a mystery, but here are today's clues, and I think the key is going to be consistency going forward into how these models, handle all this. So we're starting back just a couple of days ago, and you can see this current trough lifting out on Tuesday. We had the short wave that brought in that shot of colder air, and in our system today, you could just barely find it here in the upper atmosphere. It swings around across the Great Lakes. Brought that there's that little the trough. You see that sort of little V reflection here over Pennsylvania, New York State, and New Jersey. That's the upper trough that's swinging through, moving this system along tonight. Then you have the next one. The body of the trough wants to drop down further west as we move into early next week. But over time, and even though it's going to be probably a very long and grinding process, the last couple of runs of the GFS seem to want to at least, give the impression that troughing is going to establish itself, try to establish itself in the east over the longer haul. The European today was interesting because the European, now this is the European at day 10, which is far different from the GFS at day 10. But I'll back up the European model's 500 view. And we'll start with today. So here we go. We're at Wednesday. Our system is gone. Same idea. The trough drops for the most part to the west. Bit of a ridge here in the east early next week. But then eventually you start to see pressures begin to build across the Arctic regions and across Greenland here toward the end of the period. And as a result, we do have a fairly deep trough established by the European right along the east coast, with the flow coming out of Canada by day 10. Now, the question is, I can't see beyond day 10 on what the European does with this. Does it basically hold it there and start rotating arms around it, keeping the trough in the east? The European brings the ridge into the west coast, which is going to be very important with regards to the long-range pattern in the eastern United States. Up until now, that ridge has been off the west coast in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's basically no good. It's too far west. But the European does bring that ridge inland of the west coast toward the end, day 9, day 10, so later next week. That has to happen in order for the weather to turn significantly colder in more than just a 2 or 3 day stint. If you want cold to be sustained, you got to get that ridge inland of the west coast and keep it there for a while. And then you got to get this vortex to get pinned in eastern Canada and set up that flow from northwest Canada southeastward into the eastern part of the United States. The European seems to point to this idea. And by the way, the teleconnections, and again, remember yesterday, the teleconnections today, totally different from what the overnight ensemble runs did. Look at this. I mean, this is, if this is right, you winter weather lovers will be, at least you're being given a good sign here. You've got the PNA going from off the wall negative by the 15th of February. It goes neutral to positive and starts climbing up the charts to strong positive by February 19th, 20th, 21st. Okay, same time you've got the NAO, which is as off the wall positive as you can get it. I mean, in other words, it's about as progressive a pattern as you can get, all the way up at the top of the charts. Starts this collapse to neutral around the 17th and then goes negative from the period from the 17th to the 21st. And the EPO, which is an indicator of cold when it's negative for the eastern part of the United States, is basically negative to strongly, well, strongly negative early, but then, you know, somewhat negative right through the forecast period. So if you want to believe these teleconnection indices, as we get toward the last 10 or so days of the month, you're going to have all three of the indices in line for colder and snowier weather in the eastern part of the United States overall. But let me caution, okay? Let me caution big time. And I want to emphasize this. There are no, again, and I've said this repeatedly, but I think it's worth saying again, no magic bullets here. It's not an automatic given. Just because you have those teleconnections flashing favorable signals does not mean any kind of guarantee, because at the end of the day, if you don't have that trough and ridge in the right spot, you are not, and the timing of weather systems coming around, the small details essentially are going to be the most important. And until we see how the models line the troughs, in the trough in the east, the ridge in the west, how they line them up, you know, we have to keep a very open mind. And remember also that this is now just the last couple of runs that it's showing this. We could wind up, even with this vortex split that's happening in the stratosphere, we could wind up with a trough that goes back out in the west. In fact, I'm going to pull up just to show you what it looks like at the highest levels of the atmosphere. So we're basically looking at the top of the atmosphere. If you notice, toward the end of the period on the European, it's pretty blocky across Greenland and on up through the Arctic regions over to Siberia. You've got higher than normal pressures all throughout the North Atlantic. So that negative NAO is being shown considerably on the European model. Also, that PNA, the ridge in the inland of the West Coast, also strong. So that would match up with what the GFS ensembles are showing. That, I think, is also a good sign. So right now, a good sign for you winter weather lovers. I don't want to sound like I'm taking sides, but I'm just kind of, you know, my heart is sort of with the snow lovers, admittedly, but I'm trying to remain, you know, unbiased here. But we're going to have to just watch to see how all of this lines up over time. The next several days, I think, are going to be very, very interesting to watch how the models eventually evolve through all of this. And what's driving this, by the way, when we, I'll bring up the GFS. You know, those of you who are like really, you know, deep into the weather stuff have been reading maybe about this split in the vortex in the stratosphere, and this is one that apparently is pretty impressive and not seen very often. And if you'll notice, in the stratosphere up at 10 millibars, way up at the top, okay, you've got basically one strong polar vortex and two upper highs on either side. Now, over the next couple of days, because it's now inside the short range, that vortex is going to split. Let me show you the split a bit better. I'll start back from the beginning. But there's that vortex. You see how it just stretches and then Part of it splits and goes into Siberia. The other part of it starts to drop down into Hudson Bay. And you've got the big upper high basically sandwiching the two vortexes right here. And this is effective, by the way, this is on Sunday. So this vortex split is happening right now. There's a very big warming event occurring in the stratosphere that is causing this. And the question is what happens with all of this with regards to the bottom of the atmosphere, because here's the look at 10 millibars. You know, I'm still trying to kind of figure out how this all matches up, but I've just pulled down here. This is now, we'll go to 16 days from now, where you've had this big split in the stratosphere. You know, this is how it looks like at 18,000 feet. So, you know, the atmosphere is a bit messier at the lower levels. You can kind of see the effect of where the higher the normal pressures are from Greenland on north westward toward Siberia. And then you've got these vortexes that are sort of pinned northwest, southeast. The one in Hudson Bay is going to be very, very important with respect to the eastern part of the United States. Again, how strong is this ridge in the west? Is it going to come inland in the west coast? Is the Atlantic, you know, higher than normal pressures, are they going to extend all the way up through Greenland and across the poles? The models certainly seem to be indicating this. We're just going to have to wait. We're going to have to just sit back now, watch and wait. I'm going to go to Europe right now because, as it happened, they got crashed with snow in France, in Paris, with a foot plus, believe it or not, of snow. And the upper air in Europe, when we look at it, this is the system here. You see this closed upper low that's dropping down through western France, the cause of this snowstorm that occurred. And we've got another deep trough coming into the British Isles on for Friday. Then another system approaches as we move into Sunday and Monday and Tuesday of next week. So this split in the vortex is certainly bringing some cold weather and snow chances across much of Europe. And we'll put the precip on. And then I'll come back to the U.S. and we'll talk about some snow. But going forward, you can see there's waves of snow coming into England and Ireland as we move through the weekend and into next week. Some of that snow is going to be significant. More snow, by the way, coming in for parts of France. This is now 1 week from now, and I'll put the snowfall map up here. And there you have it. I mean, it's just snowing just about everywhere throughout Europe, through England, Scotland, Ireland, over the next 10 days. Some places, some of these amounts are in centimeters. So, you know, they're not talking about huge snowfall amounts, except where you see the darker greens up in Scotland and in parts of Scandinavia. Otherwise, you know, we're talking about generally on the order of a couple of inches to 6 inches in some places. In a few places, it's up more than a foot over the next 7 days. All right, back home. Let's see what the implications are with respect to snow back here over the next week or so. And because of these weather systems, starting with the one that's going to be coming through Thursday and Friday, you can see that there's a swath of snow being indicated here. I think probably the better way to look at this is the 24-hour snowfall. I think that's probably going to be more useful because we do have stuff that's going on now that will skew some of those numbers. And here's the snowfall for the next 18 hours throughout much of Maine and back through New Hampshire and Vermont. The snow's, of course, winding down now. What you see back through New York State, some of this is over the next few hours. And then you've got this snow with the next system that's coming out of the northern Rockies. And there's your band of snow for Chicago, putting the GFS putting Chicago in 4-inch plus snows here, northern Illinois, northern Indiana, into northwestern Ohio, southernmost Michigan. And that system does weaken as it comes to the east, with a coating to a couple of inches indicated for parts of upstate New York, northwestern Pennsylvania, and into northern New England. And then we've got some snow that drops down into the middle Mississippi Valley as we head toward Sunday into Monday. That trails northeastward toward Ohio for Indiana, Ohio, into western New York and PA, too warm near the coast. And then late in the period, you've got a system here. This is what the GFS had showing with a low and on a stalled front and a wave on it moving to the east. Again, now we're at day 9 and 10, so who knows if this is even remotely correct. And as far as eastern Canada is concerned, because of what's going on now, we'll let me make this just a bit smaller so be able to see it better with the date and cover the geography. So we've got our system at the moment. Let me back this up. Start it again. So there's your low west of Nova Scotia, west of Newfoundland. Moves out. Still no signs of any big storms for the Canadian Maritimes. You just get these weak events that move through, and generally in the east there'll be a fair absence of cold air for coastal areas. Of course, it's always there for inland spots. Now we're into Tuesday of next week, and then later on in the period there's a system here for day 8 and 9 that moves through the Maritimes. But again, nothing in terms of any kind of big ocean storm. This one becomes a big storm once it goes east of Newfoundland. This could be the beginnings of when we start to get some of the blocking action that's developing. So again, a lot to pay attention to going forward with our weather pattern. I'm actually quite excited about the prospects of watching this evolve. You know, it's very frustrating for those of you who, you know, see these things from run to run, and this is something I discourage. You know, don't focus on each individual run. Try to take them as a kind of a conglomeration and watch what's going to happen. I just already right at the first comment, Gary Vestos replying to Reaver, the Friday system. Okay, let me just back up. No one knows the weather as good as nature, and it will change and change and change. And that's correct, and that's what weather people do. We forecast the change, and we forecast the change of the change. And that's our job, is to watch. Again, nothing I said here ever is written in stone, okay? We're speculating, and speculating openly, and I think we're speculating responsibly. You'll notice that I have not said anything regarding any kind of big storm, nor should anybody interpret what I'm saying as that means that there's the prospect for a big storm. And I know you're getting tired of getting your hopes up watching videos every day. You know, every time when we get these, every winter, there's always going to be some place that winds up getting the short end of the stick. And in fact, over the last 17 winters, areas north and west of the coast of New York City have gotten the short end of the stick in a big way. We're in some kind of cycle that is not favoring inland spots, but rather it's been favoring coastal areas. I sit where I am on Long Island, and you know, we've had the 6th winter in a row of above normal snowfall, and we still have a good month and a half to go to add to those numbers. So there's the only thing we can do is just sit back and watch, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. We can't take these things personal, you know. And that's just the way things are. You know, the pattern that the weather pattern this winter has been very interesting. It has brought down some extreme cold air. It lasted for about 4 or 5 weeks, and now we've been in this sort of volatile up and down game that we've been playing for the last 3 weeks or so. And now we have something else to look forward to if the long-range models were correct. And yeah, there's too much Pacific air for sustained cold. That's correct, Reaver. Lee Goldberg, who watches me very, very carefully. Only kidding. Lee does a very good job. But yeah, he's quite right. There's too much of a mix of Pacific air. If you look at the jet stream, you don't have that real connection. I'll bring it back up, and we'll put up the upper air. and it's pretty easy to see when you look at the jet stream flow. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll put up a different view of it. Let's bring up the upper air here, and if I can see the menu choices, yes, that's the one. So if you look here, you can actually, these barbs are the actual wind barbs, and this is at the end of the period. So if you look at the way the direction of the wind is at the end of the forecast period, this is not even the end of the forecast period. This is actually this is at February 16th. You do have a flow that's not out of the Pacific here. It's coming out of northwestern Canada into the eastern part of the United States. The problem is that it doesn't exactly hold that because the blocking has not yet developed. So yeah, look at all, this is all Pacific air as we now move toward, this is now February 19th. You know, the flow here is basically west-southwest, running from Southern California to the mid-Atlantic coast. But that doesn't hold either, because then the models begin to organize and move the chess pieces up in Canada here as we go late in the period. And remember, the European has seems to have a much more bullish view of this going out. And I think even the ensembles did. If I remember correctly, the GFS ensembles were actually fairly reasonable. It's kind of hard to look at these things in the long range because they basically just, with all the variations of the model, it becomes this sort of flat-looking system. I'm going to try to do it with the anomalies. It might be a bit better. You know, it does kind of have ridging up in the northwest. It sort of has some troughing here in the east. But again, this is a very, very broad view when you look at the ensembles in the longer range. So they're not very useful. But yes, too much Pacific air is getting involved here in the short term for a cold to be sustained. And the fact is, you don't have too much. You have no blocking at all. So weather systems, the highs don't hang around; they move out and done. So it's one after another after another. Just checking on some of your. I don't see how a split vortex can be beneficial to snowstorms on the East Coast, Tom Adams. Well, it depends. Now, the problem is you've got with this split vortex in the stratosphere. I'm not. That's I don't have a lot of experience working with that level of the atmosphere, so I don't know what the connections are between what happens up there and what eventually happens down here. I have to defer to those who work with it. But the two analogs that Dr. Judah Cohen has pulled out was January of '85 with a vortex split that was like this, that wound up bringing unprecedented Arctic cold into the plains Midwest and in parts of the East. And then there was one apparently in February of '91, which basically the trough was in the west at the time, and all the vortex split did was basically extend that pattern. So I don't know. I don't think none of us really know how this is all going to play out. Now, as to your observation of heights being too high, I've seen snowstorms here with heights much higher than what's being indicated. If you have, that is not the only thing you look at. Always remember that there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that says, okay, I've got this in this position there, therefore it always means that this will be the outcome, and it doesn't work that way. You can't really look at things when you're looking at something in a broad sense. You have to get the thing underway first before we wind up, seeing what the outcome is going to be. And there's no blocking yet, but the NAO going negative would be an indicator that some blocking might develop. But the blocking part may be overstated. If we can get that cold connection to set up, I think the PNA and the EPO, as I've said, very, very important. And don't forget, by the way, the block can work against you too. If the block is too strong, then your storm track is so far south that you're just cold and dry. So just remember that. There's downside to everything. Canadian model is kind of you know, I don't know. I looked at it briefly. I really didn't spend too much time on it today. It looked like it was kind of in line with the other ones, but I didn't. Again, I didn't really spend too much time. I don't think we need to see higher heights in Alaska. The heights in Alaska are too high. The ridge is in the wrong place. It's in the Gulf of Alaska. We've got to get it out of there. And yes, we only did see snow for an hour. I got 0.2 of an inch of snow, bringing my season total to 32.4. Okay, which was pretty good. Rob Bass, do I think Florida anymore with freezing temperatures this season? Well, in the absence of any kind of blocking pattern now, it would seem like the odds of a freezing pattern into northern Florida are getting longer and longer. So, in other words, the chances are growing less and less. Unless a really, really outrageously cold pattern sets up, you're not likely to see it. But I don't want to completely discount it. I've seen stranger things happen. I have this habit of saying things. I learned a long time ago never to say anything unequivocally yes or no, because you will get burned almost every single time you do. I always keep an open mind with regards to with regards to weather. Think back like a number of you and some of the unequivocal statements that I've seen over the past couple of months regarding the things that have happened this winter that some of you have said was never going to happen. So let's just, let's always approach these things with an open mind. Cullen, you only got 1.5 inches. Yeah, the snow really did not materialize well here, even in areas where you think it should have. The models were in some instances overstating the snow. And one of the things I was cautious about last night was the fact that how much on the front end was there going to be. The changeover to freezing rain seemed to be a no-brainer, and that was going to happen. But a lot of those snow maps, had were baking the freezing rain and sleet into their snow equations, and that was obviously not the case. Thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I try. That's all I do is, I try my best to try to figure things out. I'm not looking to hit home runs with big snowstorms or anything like that. You just kind of look at things the way they are and try to figure out where they're going. They're always a challenge, and I have a lot of fun doing it, and I appreciate your kind words. Thank you. I did not work for News 12 Connecticut Shelly Man Studios. I've done News 12 Westchester, News 12 the Bronx, Brooklyn, and News 12 Long Island, of which I was one of the original News 12 Long Island people back when it started in 1986. But I haven't worked at News 12. I briefly freelanced there in 2011 and 2012, but I haven't been back since. Yes, 0-0 snow for New Jersey. Garrow, New Jersey's a big state. That has not been the case for the Jersey Shore, because the Jersey Shore had 1 foot to 1.5 feet in the blizzard. So it's for northern and northwest New Jersey in particular that you guys have not done well at all with this winter. And that's just the way it is. The Icon Model 99 Wolves is the model from Germany. I've been kind of watching it. I'm not really too impressed with it at the moment. I think the Ukemet works much better. But we'll continue to watch it and pay attention to it and see how it handles snow situations. How precise are ice measurements? 0.1, 0.02, 0.05, etc. Yeah, they're pretty. They're pretty precise. They have their criteria for measuring it, and I kind of trust the people that do it with regards to the numbers that are reported. Some of that's automated, some not, but usually the numbers are pretty good. Let's see. Am I retired? No, I'm not retired. I work for FiOS 1 News and for FiOS 1 News Long Island and FiOS 1 News New Jersey, and also I do work occasionally on WPIX TV in New York. but definitely not retired. I would like to be retired, but that's not coming anytime soon. Anything to say for showing up on the 17th? Well, that is all because of the collapsing indices. I was thinking maybe it was going to be more like the 19th to the 21st, but I don't know. Let's wait. Let's wait till tomorrow. I want to look at what the overnight ensembles do and what the overnight teleconnections and what they show, and then maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. Perhaps the models will come into line with something. And by the way, even as bad as the pattern might look, I don't know that I wouldn't say it looks awful. I mean, it's not a good snow pattern, obviously, but don't wind up being totally shocked if something evolves from that surprises in one way or another over the next couple of weeks. Okay, that's quite possible. We've seen that happen a couple of times this winter. We've seen that happen a number of times last winter. So don't close your mind to the possibility that something might surprise at the last minute, especially during the time when those teleconnections are making their big moves, when the PNA begins to spike upward, assuming it does, toward the neutral line and then going positive, and when the NAO goes from that super positive reading all the way down to zero. Keep an eye on, we're going to keep an eye on things around that time. All right, folks, I think we can call it a day. We can add, I wanted to check to see, did it do this? Hang on one second. I had set this up so that I was supposed to be able to live stream on my website at the same time, and I'm hoping that it worked, so I'm checking that right now just to see. Where are you? Okay, I gotta see if I have to get the kinks out of this system, but Reaver, you want me to talk about the old days with the LFM model accurately forecasting the blizzard of 78? Yes, it did, but that was the one time, that LFM model has a number of times where it busted in a big way. You had to spend a lot more time when we had just the one or two models to really get your head into the game as far as what was going on, and forget about the long range, because there was nothing that you could really look at with regards to weather model tools with respect to the long range. You could only guess at things, and I don't know if I want to go back completely to the days of the old limited fine mesh model, the LFM, which only went out to 48 hours, but I do think back to the times when we had to really get very, very deep into the nuts and bolts and do everything by hand. I think that was a much better way of forecasting, and I try to do that as much as I can, although because of the world we live in, it's kind of hard because we have so much to do when it comes to all this weather stuff, and you have so much information out there to absorb. It's a little more difficult, but that is a good habit that it got me into. I learned the old-fashioned way. So did a lot of my colleagues that are around my age. We learned the old-fashioned way, and it was a good way because we're able to sniff out things a lot better, I think, than some of the young folks these days. Although there are some of the young folks that I follow that are exceptional. So, it all works one way or the other. Okay, let's end it here, and we will talk to you guys tomorrow. Remember to check out 9:15 tonight if you want to do this all over again with my colleague Joe Rayo on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. And those of you who are inclined to do so, and no one is obligated, but if you if you shop on Amazon, if you do it via the Amazon links on my website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Amazon buys me a cigar every once in a while, so I would greatly appreciate it if you did that. So, if you happen to use Amazon and you link from my page, it helps me out in a nice way, and thank you for that. All right, see you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, and we will take a look at what that long range is going to show us tomorrow. I think we're going to have some interesting things to see. Take care.